200 machines, every single one of them broken. Same model, most of them.
Son, I've been doing this 30 years. You know what I see? Scrap metal. About 5 cents a pound. What's the asking price on the lot?
Nobody's asking. Nobody wants them.
Any offer on the back warehouse? Full lot, as is.
$1,000. Kid wants to open a museum.
Russell Vane was not wrong about the machines. By every standard he knew, 200 broken industrial embroidery units were worth exactly what the scrapyard would pay, nothing more. He had spent 3 decades in salvage, and he understood metal. What he did not understand was the 17-year-old standing quietly in the back of that warehouse, running his fingers along serial number plates instead of lifting lids to check motors. Damon Raines was not counting what was broken. He was counting what matched. And in a room full of experienced buyers, not one of them thought to ask why that mattered. If you've ever been told that something or someone wasn't worth the effort, stick around, because this story is for you. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. We tell stories like this every week. The warehouse at Eastgate Industrial Depot smelled like rust and old oil. The kind of smell that settles into concrete after years of machines sitting still. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, and the lot was already crowded with buyers who had shown up before the auction officially opened. Men in work boots with clipboards. Men who knew exactly what they were looking at and exactly what it was worth. Damon Raines was not one of those men. He was 17 and he had taken the bus. He had heard about the North Star Apparel Works liquidation through a notice posted on an industrial supply forum his father used to follow. The factory had been one of the larger uniform manufacturers in Bell Ridge, North Carolina, and when it closed, everything inside went with it. The shelving, the cutting tables, the thread spools, and, most importantly, the machines. 200 computerized embroidery and industrial sewing units, all tagged with the same label in red marker, broken, as is, no warrant with. Damon had written the address on the inside cover of one of his father's old notebooks and shown up with $1,080 folded inside a sealed envelope. The serious buyers moved quickly through the back warehouse, lifting lids, checking motor housings, pulling copper coils. Russell Vane, a heavyset man in his early 50s, with the kind of sunburned forearms that came from decades of outdoor lot work, was the most efficient of all of them. He opened a machine, looked inside for about 4 seconds, and closed it again. He did this 8 or 9 times before he had seen enough. When he finally spoke, he wasn't talking to anyone in particular, just announcing his conclusion to the room the way a man does when he's certain no one will argue. He said the whole lot was scrap. He said the best thing anyone could do with 200 broken embroidery machines was drive them straight to the shredder and sell the copper and steel by weight. Most of the other buyers nodded, or said nothing, which in that room meant agreement. Damon was not nodding. He was moving slowly along the far wall, not opening machines, not checking motors. He was reading the plates bolted to the side of each unit, the manufacturer codes, the serial number prefixes, the model identifiers stamped into the metal. He had a small flashlight and one of his father's notebooks, and he was writing things down. What he had noticed about 20 minutes into walking the warehouse was something that none of the scrap buyers were looking for, because they had no reason to. A large portion of the machines shared the same model designation, not all 200, but enough, maybe 130 of them, all variations of the same base unit manufactured within a span of about 6 years. In the salvage logic Russell Vane operated by, that was irrelevant. A broken machine was a broken machine. But in the logic Damon had grown up learning in a garage on the edge of Millstone Quarter, it meant something else entirely. It meant that the parts were interchangeable. It meant that a machine with a dead control board but a working motor could donate that motor to a machine with a burned motor but a working control board. It meant these weren't 200 broken machines. They were one very large, very disorganized inventory of functional components. He kept that thought to himself and kept writing. When the auctioneer called for offers on the back warehouse, no one raised a number. Russell made a joke about the museum, and the room laughed, and the auctioneer looked bored. Damon offered $1,000 for the full lot, on the condition that he handled transport himself. The auctioneer looked at the floor manager. The floor manager shrugged. They accepted. The night before the auction, Marla Raines had seen her son sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook and a calculator, running numbers she couldn't quite follow. She hadn't asked what he was planning. She had set a cup of coffee down beside him and gone to bed. The way a mother does when she knows a decision has already been made, and the only thing left is to wait and see what it costs. She had been waiting and seeing for most of Damon's life. Since his father died, that was largely what the two of them did together. She held things steady, and he pushed forward. And they managed. The ride back to Belridge cost $60 in rental truck fees and almost all of the remaining $80 Damon had brought as a buffer. By the time the last machine was unloaded into the yard behind the family garage in Millstone Quarter, he had $14 left, and 200 machines stacked so tightly that he could barely walk between them. That night, Marla stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the yard. She wasn't angry. Anger would have required energy she didn't have. What she felt was closer to a very tired kind of fear. The fear of someone who has been holding things together for a long time and can see from a distance a new weight coming. She finally turned from the window and asked Damon if he had enough money left to actually fix any of them. He told her he was working on it. That was the most honest answer he had. He started the next morning before sunrise. The garage was cramped, so he set up a folding table in the yard and began pulling machines one at a time. The first three didn't power on at all. The fourth had a control panel so corroded the connectors had fused together. The fifth had a burned power board. The sixth had a seized drive shaft. By the end of the second day, Damon had opened 12 machines and gotten none of them running, and the gap between what he had imagined in that warehouse and what he was actually looking at in his yard was starting to feel very wide. He almost called it a loss on the fourth night. He sat in the garage with the overhead light on and his father's notebook spread across the workbench, reading back through years of repair logs, machine model numbers, fault codes, component sketches, handwritten notes in the margins about which part failed most often and why. His father had spent nearly 15 years working on industrial sewing and embroidery equipment before his health gave out, and the notebooks were meticulous in the way that only a man who learned by doing tends to be. Not textbook knowledge, pattern knowledge. The kind you build by fixing the same class of machine 200 times and writing down what you find each time. Damon pulled 3 machines that matched same model prefix, same generation, and set them side by side under the work light. He stripped the first one down to its core. The motor was intact, the drive coupling was solid, but the control board was completely dead. He set it aside and opened the second machine. The control board here was in reasonable shape, the connectors clean, the capacitors intact, and when he tested it with his multimeter, it drew current correctly. But the drive assembly was seized, the belt shredded, and the tension arms snapped at the joint. He opened the third. The mechanical components were heavily worn, but the power supply was functioning, and the wiring harness was clean. He took the working motor from the first machine. He took the functional control board from the second. He took the clean wiring harness and the power supply from the third. He mounted them into a fourth machine one, with a solid frame and good mechanical geometry but nothing else working, and spent 4 hours routing cables, seating connectors, torquing down the drive assembly, and calibrating the tension system by hand using a method his father had written about in the back pages of the third notebook. At 11:40 at night, he powered it on. The display lit up. The motor engaged at idle. The needle bar moved smoothly through its range. He fed a scrap of canvas under the foot and ran a test pattern. The machine embroidered a clean line of stitching, even tension, no skips. Damon sat back on his stool and looked at it for a while. He had not bought 200 broken machines. He had bought a warehouse full of components that in the right combinations could become functioning equipment. The buyers at Eastgate had weighed that lot in pounds of metal. He had been counting something else, the number of ways the pieces could be reassembled into something the market would actually pay for. Russell Vane found out about the first working machine through someone at the depot and showed up at the Millstone Quarter garage 2 days later. He stood at the yard gate and looked at the rows of machines and the one unit sitting on the table with its housing cleaned and its display running a standby screen. He made an offer $2,600 for the entire lot, as is right now, and framed it as doing Damon a favor. He said the number slowly, the way people do when they want the other person to feel the weight of it. Damon thought about it for exactly as long as it took him to look at the machine on the table. He told Russell no. Russell left without making another offer, and Damon went back inside and started pulling the next set of machines. The problem that came into focus over the following 2 weeks was a different kind of problem. Getting one machine running had taken 4 hours and a lot of trial and error. Getting 60 running at that pace would take more time than the project could survive. He needed a way to triage faster, to look at a machine and know within minutes which category of failure he was dealing with, rather than discovering it one component at a time. He spent 3 days going back through his father's notebooks and cross-referencing the fault patterns against what he had seen in the first 12 machines he had opened. What emerged was a rough diagnostic map, not a formal document, just a working logic he kept in one notebook. Most of the failures clustered around a manageable number of root causes: power supply faults, control board failures, drive component wear, sensor and encoder degradation, mechanical alignment issues, wiring faults. Once he had internalized those categories and built a sequence for each one, power first, then signal, then mechanical, the time it took him to assess a machine dropped from hours to under 30 minutes. The 10th machine he put through the new process took him 22 minutes to diagnose and a full afternoon to rebuild. It ran clean on the first power-up. The ones after that ran too, each one faster than the last as the process tightened. By the time Damon had 7 machines operational and staged in the garage, a small embroidery shop about 12 miles outside of Bell Ridge had heard about him through a mutual contact and called to ask about pricing. The shop owner was skeptical in the direct way that small business owners tend to be when something sounds too convenient. She asked twice whether the machine had been tested under load. Damon told her she could use it for 10 days before she paid anything. She agreed because she had nothing to lose. 10 days later, she called back and bought the machine for $2,850. That single sale returned nearly 3 times the cost of the entire original purchase. A second shop bought 2 machines the following week. A small contract sewing operation sent an email asking whether Damon had anything with a larger embroidery field. For the first time since the auction at Eastgate, the question was no longer whether the machines had value. The question was whether Damon could produce them fast enough to keep up with the people asking. The problem with moving faster was that speed had a cost Damon hadn't fully accounted for yet. Through November and into early December, he pushed his daily output as hard as the garage would allow. He had developed a rhythm: diagnose in the morning, pull components in the afternoon, assemble and test in the evening. On good days, he could move 2 machines through the full process. On days when a rebuild required fabricating a custom spacer or sourcing a specific encoder from one of the donor units, 1 machine was the ceiling. He had sold 11 machines by the time the contract sewing operation placed a second order. And the money coming in was enough to cover materials, utilities, and a small reserve. It wasn't profit in any meaningful sense yet, but the math was trending in the right direction, and for the first time since the auction, Damon allowed himself to believe the project had a real future. That belief lasted until the call from Bright Lane Uniform Co. Bright Lane was not a small shop. It was a regional manufacturer with several production lines running simultaneously, and Kendra Morrow, the operations manager who had contacted Damon after hearing about his machines through the owner of the first embroidery shop, had been direct about what she needed. She wanted equipment that performed consistently under sustained load, and she had made that clear before agreeing to purchase. Damon had sold her one machine for $3,100, delivered it personally, and run a calibration check on site before he left. For the first 11 days, the machine ran without a problem. On the 12th day, in the middle of a production run for a school district uniform order, the machine began vibrating at the drive housing. The vibration worsened over about 20 minutes. Then the needle bar alignment shifted, and the tension system locked. The machine stopped mid-stitch, and a section of partially embroidered fabric was pulled from the line as unusable. The production floor lost several hours getting the line reorganized around the failure. Kendra called Damon that afternoon. She was not shouting. Shouting would have been easier to deal with. Her voice was flat and precise. The voice of someone who had already decided what the facts were and was now simply stating them for the record. She said she had purchased a machine that worked. She said she had not purchased an experiment. She expected him to come and look at it, and she expected him to have an answer. Damon drove out the next morning and pulled the machine apart on Bright Lane's production floor. It took him about 40 minutes to find the failure point. A drive transfer coupling, one he had inspected during the rebuild and judged to be functional, had a hairline fracture running along the inner race, invisible to a visual check, and undetectable under a short test run, but catastrophic under sustained production load. The coupling had not been broken when he installed it. It had been damaged at some point in the machine's previous life, stressed repeatedly over years of use, and weakened to the point where continued operation was only a matter of time. He had tested whether the component worked. He had not tested how much working life it had left. That was the distinction he had missed. And sitting on the production floor of Bright Lane, with the machine open in front of him, Damon understood it clearly for the first time. There was a difference between repairing a machine, getting it to run, and remanufacturing one, which meant returning it to a condition where its remaining service life was known and documented. He had been doing the first thing while telling customers they were getting the second. Not intentionally, but the result was the same. He told Kendra he would bring a replacement unit within 48 hours at no charge while he repaired the original. She looked at him for a moment, then agreed, not warmly, but with the measured patience of someone willing to see whether a second chance was worth giving. He followed through. He drove back to Millstone Quarter, identified the cleanest machine in current inventory, and spent the rest of that day and most of the night rebuilding it under a standard he had not applied before. Every wear component, not just the ones showing obvious damage, but every component in a category known to degrade under sustained use, came out and was replaced with a part that had been tested independently for load capacity. He documented each replacement in a notebook entry tied to a serial number he stamped into the machine's housing. When he finished, he ran the machine for 6 continuous hours under simulated production load before loading it into the truck. Kendra sent an email a week after the replacement was installed. The machine was running without issues. She wanted to know whether he had more available. But Damon had already stopped selling. He shut down outbound orders and spent nearly 3 weeks rebuilding his process from the ground up. Every machine currently in progress was disassembled back to its frame and restarted under the new standard full disassembly first, without exception, mandatory replacement of all high-wear components, regardless of visible condition, independent electrical testing before mechanical reassembly, mechanical alignment verified by measurement rather than feel, a minimum of 4 hours of load testing, continuous monitoring during that test, and a final inspection before the housing was closed. Each machine received a stamped code and a paper record, what had been replaced, what had been retained, what the load test showed, and the date of completion. He added a 6-month warranty to every unit going forward, something he had mentioned loosely to earlier customers, but never formalized until now. The 3 weeks cost him money he didn't have to spare. He burned through the reserves built from the first 11 sales, and there were several days where the only thing keeping the garage running was the knowledge that shutting the process down now would cost him everything he had built. Marla knew he had stopped selling, without knowing exactly why, and she didn't ask. She left food in the garage on the nights he worked past midnight, and said nothing about the credit card statement that arrived that week. When Damon reopened orders in early January, buyers who received the new units noticed quickly that the paperwork was different. A formal record with machine codes, test dates, component logs, and technician sign-off on each page. The small shop owner who had bought the first machine called to ask if she could send it back for what Damon was now calling a full remanufacture inspection. He said yes and did it at no charge. Kendra placed an order for 2 additional units. Both ran without issue through the following month's production cycles. Word moved faster now than it had in the fall. The customer base for remanufactured industrial equipment turned out to be larger than Damon had initially understood. Every small and mid-size manufacturer who needed production-capable machinery but could not absorb the cost of new equipment, which for a quality embroidery unit could reach $30,000 or more. His machines were priced between $3,000 and $6,000, came with documentation and a warranty, and had been tested under load by someone who understood how they failed. That combination did not exist anywhere else in the regional market at that price point. Not every machine from the original North Star lot could be rebuilt into a sellable unit. Some had frame damage, some had been cannibalized too heavily, and some had mechanical tolerances too far out of spec to recover. But those machines still contained functional motors, clean control boards, working power supplies, usable sensors and drive components in various states of wear. There was a steady parallel market for those parts shops that already owned a working machine but needed a replacement board or a specific motor size for a model the original manufacturer no longer supported. Damon began listing individual components online, priced by condition and tested status, and that inventory moved from the first week. He now had 3 income streams running from the same original purchase complete remanufactured machines: individual reclaimed components, and repair and maintenance services for machines already in the field. Then, the inquiry arrived that changed the scale of everything. A regional uniform manufacturing group, operating several production facilities, sent a formal email requesting 42 remanufactured embroidery units with consistent specifications, full documentation, verified electrical safety compliance, replacement part availability, a delivery schedule, a warranty, and post-sale service support. They had heard about Rain's reworks through Kendra Morrow, whose name appeared in the first line of the email as a reference. Damon read the email 3 times. 42 machines was more than twice his total output since October. The electrical safety compliance language referenced third-party verification standards he had not previously encountered. And the post-sale service component meant he would need to be reachable and capable of responding to field failures across multiple sites. The garage in Millstone Quarter was not built for this. But the question was not whether the garage was ready. The question was whether Damon was willing to build something that was. He spent a week pricing out what it would take: a proper testing bench, load measurement equipment, a component racking system, a coded labeling and documentation workflow, calibration tools he had been making do without, and an additional section of the empty warehouse adjacent to the garage. He also brought on a part-time helper named Gary, a man who had spent years doing maintenance at a textile plant before it closed, and knew industrial equipment well enough to work without much direction. The total investment was steep, most of the cash he had accumulated since October, but the math worked if the contract came through. He signed the warehouse lease, ordered the equipment, and formally registered Rain's Reworks as a business entity. The name on the invoice, the warranty card, and the lease agreement was no longer just a label on a notebook. It was a company. The contract was not signed yet, but Damon prepared a formal production sample and documentation package and submitted them at the end of the month. Then, he waited for the kind of response that would tell him whether he had just built a foundation or overextended himself into a hole he couldn't climb out of. The response came back on a Thursday morning, and it was not the one Damon had been hoping for. The email from the Uniform Manufacturing Group was formally worded and careful in the way that business correspondence tends to be when the writer wants to leave a door open while closing the immediate one. The production samples had been forwarded to an independent evaluation firm, and the results had come back with findings the customer could not overlook. The machines themselves performed within acceptable range. The mechanical components, the drive systems, the stitch output under load had all passed. What had not passed was the electrical infrastructure. Several of the sampled units showed inconsistent grounding stability and non-uniform wiring configurations that did not meet the required safety standard. The contract was being placed on hold pending resolution. Damon read the email twice, then set his phone face down on the workbench and stood in the warehouse for a while. He had signed the lease. He had ordered the equipment. He had brought Gary on. He had submitted the sample package believing it was ready, and it had not been ready. And now he was carrying the overhead of an expanded operation with no contract to justify it. The machines waiting on the rebuild floor represented weeks of labor and a significant portion of his remaining cash. The component orders placed in anticipation of the 42-unit contract were already arriving. The rent on the warehouse addition was due at the end of the month, regardless of what happened next. Russell Vane appeared at the Millstone Quarter-Yard gate 2 days after the email arrived. He looked at the warehouse addition, at the new equipment visible through the open roll-up door, at the stack of component boxes that hadn't been unpacked yet. And he made the kind of assessment he was very good at making. His offer was $68,000 for everything, the remaining inventory, the reclaimed component stock, the testing equipment, the lease assignment, all of it. He presented the number the same way he had presented $2,600 in the fall, slowly, with the weight of it given room to settle. He told Damon the offer was fair. He said that walking away from a position before it collapsed was not failure, it was experience. He said that $68,000 was a real outcome for a 17-year-old who had started with $1,000, and that there was no shame in taking it. Damon listened to all of it without interrupting. He told Russell he would think about it and let him know. Russell left a card on the workbench and walked back to his truck. That night, Marla sat down at the kitchen table across from Damon after her shift. She looked at her son for a moment, not with the tired fear she'd carried in October when she had stood at the kitchen window, looking out at 200 machines stacked in the yard, but with something more level, more present. She asked him one question. Did he know where the problem was? Damon said yes. Marla told him that was his answer then. She got up and went to bed. It was the most useful thing anyone said to him that week. He went back to the warehouse at 11 o'clock that night and started pulling machines. The electrical problem, once he understood it fully, had a clear origin. North Star Apparel Works had operated for decades, and over that time the machines on their floor had been serviced by different technicians, repaired with different components, and updated at different points in their service history, according to whatever standard was current at the time. The result was that machines built on the same base model had developed meaningfully different internal wiring configurations. Some used one grounding scheme, others a different one. Some had wiring harnesses partially replaced with components from a different manufacturer's spec. None of this had mattered when the machines were running on North Star's own production floor, because the factory's electrical infrastructure had been calibrated around the variation. But when Damon pulled components from multiple machines and combined them into rebuilt units, he was mixing those configurations without standardizing them first. He had unified the mechanical side and the software calibration side. He had not unified the electrical side because he had not known there was variation to unify. The solution required him to disassemble every machine in inventory, including the ones already certified under his previous process, and rebuild the wiring from a single standard he would set himself. He spent 2 days writing that standard, working from the original manufacturer documentation he found in a digitized service archive online, cross-referencing it against the best condition wiring he had seen in the highest quality machines in the lot. The standard specified the grounding path, the wiring gauge at each segment, the connector type at each junction, the fusing configuration, and the testing sequence that would confirm compliance before the housing was closed. He printed it out and taped it to the wall above the main rebuild bench. Then he told Gary the following morning that every machine in the facility was going back to bare frame. Gary looked at the floor for a moment, then picked up a screwdriver and started on the nearest unit without a word. That response told Damon he had hired the right person. The rebuild took 3 weeks. There were days when the cost of what he was doing felt like it might exceed what the contract was worth. There were evenings when the $68,000 figure Russell had left on that card had a pull to it that was difficult to dismiss entirely. $68,000 was real. The contract was still a possibility, not a certainty, and the difference between those two things was not nothing. But Damon kept coming back to the same thought. He knew what the problem was, and he knew how to fix it. Walking away from a solvable problem because the solution was expensive was not the same as recognizing a genuine dead end. It was just fear, dressed up as practicality. When the last machine came off the rebuild floor under the new electrical standard, Damon ran the full test sequence on every unit in the 42-machine sample group, grounding resistance, load draw, wiring continuity at each segment. 6 hours of sustained operation under production simulation. Every machine was logged, every result recorded, every number inside the specified range. He packaged the documentation, not the informal notebook entries he had used earlier, but a formal record with machine codes, test dates, component logs, and technician sign-off on each page, and submitted the complete package to the independent evaluation firm. The results came back in under 2 weeks. Every sampled unit passed. The grounding stability results were consistent across the group. The wiring configurations met the required standard without exception. The evaluating firm noted in their report that the documentation package was more complete than they typically received from established remanufacturing operations. Kendra called the day after the results were released. She was already past asking about the results and was asking about delivery logistics. The contract was back on the table. 42 machines to be delivered in 4 scheduled shipments over 8 weeks, with the first shipment due in 30 days. The first shipment went out on a Tuesday morning in late March, 12 machines loaded onto a rented flatbed. Each one wrapped, strapped, and tagged with its serial code and documentation packet. Damon drove the truck himself, stayed for the installation, and ran a calibration check on each unit before he left. Every machine powered up cleanly. The production supervisor ran test fabric through 3 of them while Damon and Gary watched, and all 3 stitched without incident. The remaining shipments went out on schedule. No field failures, no callbacks, no emails from Kendra with a flat, careful tone. The contract payment received in installments as each shipment was accepted rebuilt Damon's cash position, and then exceeded it. He paid off the equipment purchases, settled the warehouse lease through the end of the year, and had enough left to order a second round of donor inventory from a textile plant in Georgia that had closed the previous year. In the months that followed, the business grew steadily. Vocational schools in the region began purchasing remanufactured machines for their textile programs because the price point fit their equipment budgets and the documentation satisfied procurement requirements. Independent embroidery shops found that Rains Reworks could service machines the original manufacturers had long since stopped supporting. Component orders came in from as far as 4 states away for parts that were otherwise difficult to find. The original 200 machines from the North Star lot had been fully processed, some into complete remanufactured units, some into component inventory, the remainder into scrap. Only after every recoverable part had been removed and cataloged, cumulative revenue crossed $3,400,000 over the following years. Eastgate Industrial Depot held another liquidation the following spring. A mid-size apparel manufacturer had shuttered its North Carolina operations, and several hundred pieces of equipment were staged in the same back warehouse where the North Star machines had sat 2 years earlier. Russell Vane was there. Several of the same buyers from the original auction were there. And 3 flatbed trucks with the Rains Reworks logo on the door panels were parked outside the loading gate before the auction opened. Damon's crew moved through the warehouse with tablets scanning serial plates and logging model numbers, tagging machines with colored adhesive labels, restore parts, rebuild, the way a triage team moves through a field quickly and without sentiment, because they had done it enough times to know what they were looking at before the housing came off. Russell watched from across the warehouse floor. He didn't say anything about museums. Back at the Rains Reworks facility, machines arrived at the intake bay, broken and tagged for assessment, moved through the rebuild floor in stages, and emerged from the other side, tested, documented, and loaded onto outbound trucks. In at one end, out the other. The gap between those two states, broken and functional, discarded and productive, was where the business lived. And it lived there because Damon had learned from the inside of thousands of disassembled machines exactly what that gap was made of and how to close it. Marla stood in the second-floor office one afternoon, looking down through the window at the production floor below. She had taken a part-time administrative role with the company, handling supplier correspondence and scheduling, and she understood the operation now in a way she hadn't when she was standing at a kitchen window in October, looking at 200 machines stacked in a yard. The fear she had carried then was gone. What had replaced it was harder to name, but easier to see. It was in the way she looked at the floor, like someone watching something that had been promised and had actually arrived. On the wall behind Damon's desk, mounted on a small bracket, was a brass wrench, old, worn at the handle. The kind of tool that has been used so many times the finish disappears and the metal underneath goes smooth. It had been his father's. It was the first thing he had moved from the garage in Millstone Quarter when the company relocated, and it was the last thing he looked at before he left at the end of each day. Not as a reminder of where he had started, but as a reminder of who had taught him to ask the right question in the first place. Russell Vane saw scrap metal and calculated weight. Damon saw the same machines and asked which parts still worked. One question produced 5 cents a pound. The other built a company. The machines hadn't changed. The question had. That's the thing nobody tells you about value. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's sitting in a warehouse with a broken label on it, waiting for someone patient enough to look past the surface. And sometimes that someone is a 17-year-old with $1,000, a notebook full of his father's handwriting, and the nerve to say yes when every experienced person in the room was already walking away. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join us, because every week we find another story about someone who saw possibility where others saw nothing. The next one might be exactly what you need.